All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to September 8th, 2020 Teacher Tuesday, which is going to be on participating in the 2020 election with Cynthia Peters. I'm going to do some very quick housekeeping slides, and then I will turn you over to Cynthia. First of all, my name is Krista Mosier, and I am the manager of PD Field Services for Train PD at TCAL. And with me today is Anne Marie Molinari Sanders and Beth Ponder for backup and technical assistance. So now I would like to introduce Cynthia Peters, works for World Education and is the editor for the national publication, The Change Agent. She currently teaches ESOL in a workplace program in Boston, and since 2002 has taught a wide range of adult education classes, including ABE, GED, Bridge to College, and the Adult Diploma Program. All right, I am going to stop sharing and let Cynthia have it, or have the controls, or have something.
Yeah, I'm going to share.
There you go, Cynthia.
Yes, I'm going to share my screen. And thank you so much for that introduction. And yes, it is World Education. It feels like work education sometimes. But we do our best. Yeah, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. It looks like a great crowd. I am really happy to be sharing some materials with you that I hope you'll find useful. I always just have teachers in mind, trying to make these materials as accessible to you and your students and easy for you to use and translate into the classroom as possible. And I welcome your questions in the chat all along the way. There's times where I'll pause and try to solicit your comments, but please feel free to just make a comment or ask a question, and I'll be checking the chat to see what's happening there. And so don't disappoint me. If I go, I'm going to check the chat and there's nothing there, then I'll feel disappointed. Also, Krista and Beth and Anne Marie are under instructions to interrupt me. If there's a question in the chat that feels like I missed, they're going to interrupt me. So please make this as interactive as possible and let me hear from you. So yeah, the title of the webinar today is Participating in the 2020 Election. It's the first in a series, so there's going to be another one on October 13th, and I have a slide about that later. It's going to be also about the election, but with a slightly different angle. For today's agenda, after we do the welcome and the introductions and how to access the change agent, I'm going to give you a quick reminder about the census, because that has been an ever-moving target and a really important part of our civics work in 2020. And then we're going to dive into the 2020 election, and I have some specific information about voting in Texas that I hope is useful to you. A lot of you, I'm sure, know some of this already, but you know, the way I have put it onto the slides and make it available to you to teach to students, I hope that part will be helpful. And then I have an interesting project-based learning opportunity for you to share with your students. It's called Becoming a Voting Ambassador. And I have this lesson packet available in two formats, as a PDF or as Google Slides. So we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to wrap up. So some of you may not know that the change agent the TCAL has bought a bulk subscription to the change agent for all of the teachers in Texas, and they made it really easy for you to log in. So this screenshot shows what the top page of the change agent website looks like. You can see that I'm logged in as C. Peters and my password is there, but when you get to this screen, you'll put TCAL with a capital T for username. And the reason why I did that is because that's what it defaults to. If your students are logging in by phone, or if you're logging in on your phone, it's going to default to a capital T there. And then the password is all lowercase TCAL. So it's very easy to remember, very easy to share with students. All of you have total access to all the change agent resources. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this webinar exploring those resources. There are webinars in your PD portal where you can hear me go on at length about what's available there. So you could go and watch the recording of one of those if you want. But I do encourage you to log in, share the login with your students, and they can listen to the audio versions of articles. And there's just so much that you can use for distance teaching if you take advantage of that resource. And thanks again to TCAL for making that happen. So that's just one little bit of housekeeping to get out of the way. I want to make sure everybody knows that detail. The New England Literacy Resource Center, which the Change Agent is a part of, has been focusing a lot this year on these two big civics moments, the census and voting, and the election. And our election work, it comes under the umbrella of VERA, and that stands for Voter Education, Registration, and Action. And the materials are at the NELRC.org website. And so some of the things I'm sharing with you are available there, and there's a lot more available there. So I want to just make sure you have that resource and you can go check it out. So I said I wanted to do a quick mention of the census. And the reason for that is that it's very important for our students and for all of our communities. And as some of you may know, the deadline for the census has been an extremely moving target. The most recent deadline was September 30th. And now, that is being contested. And a judge recently ruled that the census could not stop counting on September 30th, but it's somewhat unresolved. So since it's constantly unfolding, it might be useful just to hold in your head September 30th as a deadline if you want to try to get your students to think about filling out the census. Saying September 30th is not far off from the truth, probably. It could be extended to October 31st, but we're not sure. But just getting people to do it as soon as possible would be a really smart idea. It's a critical part of our democracy. It has many, many important functions, but the two that I'm going to just mention here are representation in Congress and federal money disbursement to the states. In terms of representation in Congress, Texas is in a very unique position right now in the whole country. It's the only state that stands to gain 3 seats in the House of Representatives if you're not undercounted. So being counted fully in Texas could translate into more representation in the House of Representatives. And that's a really important ingredient of our democracy, right? Is that you're truly represented in federal government. So this might be a good map to share with your students to show the importance of being counted. The other thing is federal money going to your state. And that is partly determined by the population count. So if you're undercounted in Texas, you'll get less money from the federal government. And right now, what that would cost Texas would be something like $1,500 per person per year. So, if you think about how much, if a family of 5 or 10 or something isn't counted, then it's that amount per person times every year until 2030 when the next count is. So it's a lot of money. And the money in Texas is spent on these programs, which are all very important to our communities in general, especially our students, if they're not able to get healthcare, if they're not able to purchase the food they need or have the housing help that they need, they're not going to be able to come to class, they're not going to be able to further their education, they're not going to be able to get ahead. So it's a really big deal to our communities to get counted properly. How is Texas doing so far in terms of getting counted? Well, there's this really great interactive map called Census Hard to Count Maps 2020.us. You can easily find it just by Googling hard to count census or something like that. And this map shows you how your state is doing in general. So are there any observations? If you want to put in the chat, what do you notice about this map? The darker the blue, the higher the self-response rate is so far. So keep in mind, this is a count of people who have self-responded, meaning they got the postcard from the census, they went online, filled it out, or they filled out the paper, sent it back. They haven't had to be door knocked or called, in other words. So yeah, I'm just curious if there's anything in the chat about, what do you observe here? We need to become more blue. Yes, and of course, blue in this sense has nothing to do with Democrats or Republicans. It's just the color that the census chose to represent. Yes, we need to get darker blue. Yes. And then, there's other interesting things to notice if you wanted to share this with students, like what regions tend to get undercounted. What is going on there? Why are some regions lighter and some darker? What's happening in the big cities? It's just some interesting observations might come out. And then you could share even more detail. Check this out. And this is what I mean when I say the map is interactive. This is organized by census tract. So it's much more detail. So now look at Texas. And what do you observe there? Here we have the blue is still one of the relevant colors, but now we're seeing more yellows and browns. And the darker the brown, the worse the undercount is, or the higher the undercount is. So I'm wondering if anybody has any observations about this. Gloria says, very interesting. What's interesting, Gloria? Tell me what you see. What happens when when you just take the averages of all that's going on in Texas, you kind of got that medium blue color, right? It wasn't the lightest blue, but it was sort of not the darkest blue either. So the average made Texas look kind of bluish. But then when you take away the averages and you look at it by census tract, you kind of see a lot of brown, right? West Texas needs to improve. Yeah. What's going on in West Texas that they're having a hard time getting counted? Does anybody know? There's a lot of study, Alex, about why people are counted less. There's a lot of things that make you a harder to count community. For example, do you have internet access? Is there a lot of poverty? Is there a lot of children? Places with more children tend to be more undercounted. Where there's Native American or indigenous populations, also hard to count. Rural areas, hard to count. Immigrant populations where they might not speak English as their first language. Yeah, you all are naming it. COVID has had a big effect, absolutely. Yeah. So good. And then it's also really, if you're doing math with your students and you think about, how the Houston and Dallas, like the big cities, when they get better counted, it affects the average in the whole state. And the reason why it can affect the whole average is because those densely populated areas, when they're well counted, kind of affect the average of the whole state. It's kind of an interesting way to think about proportionality and percentages and how things can get skewed when you average things together. Some people might be afraid to participate. Absolutely. Yeah. Good points. Absolutely. Why should I tell the federal government where I live, how many children I have, all their names and birth dates, not only that, but all the people living with me. They might not be my family. They might be any other kinds, and not, extended family or just friends or neighbors who are staying with me now. I'm supposed to count everybody, and I don't really want to do that, for various reasons. So yeah, there's a lot there. And I did some webinars last spring for Texas on the census, and those are in your PD portal. You could look those up and think about if you want to bring this into your class. And especially, with distance learning, you could have students log in and try to fill out the census online with your support. They could buddy up and fill it out with each other, with each other's support. There's help at census.gov in various languages that they could get. And so, it's something to bring into the classroom if you have time, if you can try to get it done, hopefully before September 30th, keeping in mind that deadline might get extended still further. Yes, they might not, Christina says they might not realize how much the census helps. Yeah, so when you're just told to do something, but you don't know why you're supposed to do it, and it just seems intrusive, you're not really gonna do it. I mean, a lot of people aren't gonna do that, but once you know the impact that it could have on your community, then you might be more willing to do it. So, great, well, thank you all for commenting and chatting, and this isn't a webinar on the census per se, so I don't want to spend too much more time on it, but I wanted to just give you this little glimpse so that if you want to circle back around to it on your own or check out any of those other PDs on the portal, you can do that in your own time. And also look at the Change Agent, which has a number of student written articles about the census, which are really good materials to bring into the classroom to get students more excited about it. So thank you. Thank you for your comments. All right, let's move into talking about voting. So again, the Stand Up and Be Counted umbrella term includes both the census and voter education, registration, and action. And this is a nonpartisan attempt to get teachers excited about teaching about voting in the elections and how to take action around those things in the classroom. So what I'm going to do here is share a little bit more about Vera, but then dive into some specifics about Texas. So if you go to the Vera website, this is a screenshot of what you'll see. you'll see a tab about state-specific information. That is all New England states. So it's not going to be relevant to you at all. The two that are going to be relevant are program resources and classroom resources. So those are materials that you might want to use in addition to what I'm sharing with you here. So to think about Texas, I wanted to just first share some key dates. This is what I found in my research, and please correct me if I get anything wrong here. I'm a Bostonian who dug pretty deeply into Texas elections and learned a lot, and I'm trying to share it back with you because we don't always know all the ins and outs of what's happening in our state. I certainly am no expert on Massachusetts elections. Often as teachers, I'm sure you all know, you don't become an expert on something till you have to teach it. So you all may or may not know a lot of this stuff. So I'm sorry if it's redundant. I hope it's helpful. And if I get anything wrong, just please chime in. So I believe all your primaries have been held. You can register by mail in Texas, and the deadline for that is that the application would have to be postmarked October 5th. So that's a really important deadline to keep in mind for getting students registered. There's two ways you can get the registration form. You can download the form from that link there, and then you print it out and sign it and mail it back to the address given. Or you can request a voter registration form, and you go to that same link and hit request, and then you fill out your address, and the Secretary of State will send you an application, a voter registration form, and then you need to send that back postmarked by October 5th. So unfortunately, both of these approaches require going on the internet and filling out something online. So if that's hard for your students, you might need to troubleshoot that with them. They can also go in person. In that case, they need to find out, where the closest place to them is, and they need to do that by October 5th. And all that information is at that link that I shared there. So then you can also request a mail-in ballot if you're over 65, disabled, out of the county on election day, or in jail. So if you want a mail-in ballot, you have to request it by October 23rd. So important piece of information. You can't do it if you don't meet one of those 4 criteria. So if you're under 65 and not disabled, et cetera, you have to vote in person. This is my understanding. And this has been contested in Texas. I know there've been some arguments back and forth, and they've been been resolved in court and things like that. But this is the current reality. One thing that makes voting in Texas a little easier this year is that there's early voting that has been extended. It runs from October 13th to the 30th. The early voting is a really important piece of the election here. It can really help increase voter turnout. So talking to your students about early voting is really a good idea. You have to vote in person for early voting. It's not nothing you mail in or anything. You go in person to a place and vote. But especially during COVID, this could help people feel safer about voting, because they might feel like, well, if it's spread out over all this time, I'm not going to be standing in some long line or going into some crowded polling place where people have been, breathing all day long. It's much more spread out, and so it might feel a lot safer. How does this information land on people? Have I left out anything important, or does anybody see any kind of problem? Do you think a lot of people in Texas already know this information? And it's kind of boring, dry dates and links and things like that. But, sometimes the key thing is just, what are the steps? How do I do this? So I hope it's helpful in that way. I added a little more just, because as I was exploring these things, I got a little stuck on some things. For example, when you go to register, you can check to see if you're already registered, because indeed some of us may have registered and forgotten that we registered. So you can check. And what do you need to check to see if you're registered? If you hit that drop-down menu where you see it says selection criteria, you have to choose VUID, TDL, or address. So right off the bat, I was like, I have no idea what a VUID is. And I figured out TDL is Texas driver's license, but I didn't really know what that was right away. I mean, I was right away confronted by, I have no idea what you're talking about. And so if you're doing this with students, one of the things you're doing with them is helping them confront the obstacle, right? Like go online to do something, and the first thing that happens is you don't know what these initials stand for. And so you get discouraged and you just say, I quit. So part of what we're teaching here is it's both digital literacy and it's document or form literacy. But when I say literacy, it's not just can you read it, but it's can you persist through the things that you don't know. So I Googled VUID Texas to try to figure out what that was. And it turns out it means voter unique ID. Okay, who knew? Texas driver's license, that's pretty obvious. Or you can use your address to find out if you're registered. So that's the first step for getting registered. Some of your people might know that they're not registered, so they can skip this step, obviously. Then once you go to register, you get something that looks like this. And you know, the first question is, are you a citizen or not? Obviously, you have to be a citizen to vote. So if you say no, that's going to be the end of that. If you say yes, then it's going to take you through a form. And it's really important to read the instructions here. In red, it says, important, you must know your county of residence. Now, not everybody knows their county because whoever talks about their county, you know, it's not part of your mailing address usually. It's not something anybody thinks about too much. So that's another thing you either have to ask somebody who knows or Google it or figure it out somehow. And so again, just that little bit of persistence, kind of get through the first thing that you don't know and keep going. So then the second bullet says the application form will appear after you answer the questions below. So you can't even get to the form until you say if you're a citizen or not. All right, so I see Ivy is saying, you hit it, many absolutely do not know this info. I mean, right, because who can store this kind of information in your brain? I mean, it's so much to take in, and there's been so much debate about it, and a lot of shenanigans. So it's hard to store, and also it's just, it can be frustrating. So I think, again, just to say, we're really trying to teach the importance of elections, the idea that voting matters, and then persistence around actually getting to vote. So I think this idea of voting early is a really important thing to emphasize because, you know, the other reason for this is that, you know, we don't have election day as a day off. You know, many of our students will be working that day. It will be hard to find time to vote. You could be confronted with long lines. If you go for early voting, say you show up on the first day of early voting, October 13th, and you show up with one of your 7 forms of ID that you have to be able to vote in Texas, but somebody says, they say, oh, there's something wrong with this ID. Well, then you have time to figure it out, right? It's not like the last possible minute. You have a bunch more days of early voting, and you could even go all the way to November 3rd to solve your problem. So I think, you know, really encouraging early voting could be really helpful strategy in increasing voter turnout. So Kim is saying, you know, obviously many of our students are not citizens. Correct. Yes, that is true. And I want to make this useful for students who are not citizens as well. So it's not all about just the mechanics of voting. And you'll see in the voting ambassador packet that I'm going to share that it's also about just other forms of engagement. So thank you for raising that, Kim. Lainey, if we can encourage eligible voters to vote early, that's going to eliminate some issues. Yeah. And that's actually one thing that non-citizens can do. They can just play the role of encouraging people to vote. So in a way, for non-citizens to learn this stuff and then play the role of encouraging the people they do know who are citizens, which could include their own children, for example, who've turned 18, or other people in their community who are citizens and can vote. You know, they're just encouraging them to vote, they could increase voter turnout. Or as somebody just pointed out, when they do become citizens, they'll have this background. So thank you for that. So another interesting thing is I included the screenshot of something from the Texas Tribune about how Governor Abbott extended early voting by 6 days. So I think that's kind of interesting to include because it just shows that these things are fluid. They're not written in stone. You know, how the elections look, what they feel like, when they happen, who they're accessible to or not accessible to, just all of the processes around elections are fluid. They're contested, they're debated, they're argued about in court. You know, people sue each other back and forth. You know, governor is pressured to do one thing or another thing. You know, it's just, it's an alive process. It's not written in stone. So it's really important to think about this, what to bring when you vote. I listed the 7 forms of acceptable ID. I'm not going to name them all, but you get the basic idea. There's something, if you're over 70, there's some exceptions that might be good for people to know. And there's also, look at this slide, it's got way too much type on it, but I just left it that way because I felt like, there are 2 backups if you don't have the ID. One is on election day, you can sign a sworn statement about why you don't have the acceptable ID. And then and then there's a list of other documents that you can bring, like a utility bill. And then there's another option, which is if you can't make the sworn statement, you can cast a provisional ballot, and then you have 6 days to go somewhere and submit the proper ID so that your vote can be counted. Now, who wants to do either of those things? I mean, it's good to know that they exist as backup, but that's not going to be your ideal way to vote. So that's why I would really stress that people figure out about the ID so that they can vote smoothly and easily and not be stressed by other demands. But it's good to know that these backups exist. And it's going to take a lot to kind of parse that out with ESL students, or even within English, first language English speaker. I mean, it's just a lot to try to understand and take in. It's good to know that this little fail-safe is there because voting is our right. But it's complicated. So most of my ESL students, says Daniel, indicate that the main reason they wish to become US citizens is to be able to vote. That's great. What a great motivator. And Ivy says, it's a great discussion in class each week to see how their Zoom meetings went and the questions they got. Oh, because Ivy, you're talking about you started working as a census ambassador. Yay, I'm so glad. Okay, I'm going to be talking here about how you can train your students to be voting ambassadors, but Ivy's referring to the census ambassador training, which is another thing a very similar kind of training.
And
all right, I wanted
Cynthia,
to ask you all. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Cynthia, you had a comment here from Lainey that since last year I've been stressing the importance of the power of the vote and telling them to tell anyone who is a citizen. As a former election judge, it is important to know the options.
Yeah, great.
So
great. And so Lainey, that's wonderful. And the lesson packet that I'm going to share with you today, I hope it just gives you even that much more of a structured way to support students to talk to others about voting. So great. Thank you for that. I've been really focusing on a lot of the tedium here, how to vote, the process, the ID that you need, the online form that you need. It's very procedural. I'm just wondering if anybody has thoughts about what else there is to teach here in this sort of more conceptual, maybe, about voting or about elections in general. Like what, because getting bogged down in the procedural stuff is super important to do. People need to know that information to be able to vote. But there's a lot more going on here. Lainey, you're getting a shout out. You're amazing, apparently, and you have awesome classes. Great. Thanks for supporting each other. What happens when you physically go vote? What can you expect? Oh, that's great. Yeah. Actually, and we used to do that in person. We would do mock elections, so people could have the feeling of it, but we can't really do that with distance learning, but maybe you can figure out something. Yeah, Claire says, we can teach about civics and how government works so that they're getting not just the procedures, but some of the meat, the background, what's the logic of this system? Yeah, so much social studies. And then Ivy says, well, my brain automatically goes to math. Yes, the math, yes, because there's a lot of math here to compute. And then Alex says, many of my friends have decided not to vote in Texas because of the complication of the Electoral College, making votes not meaningful. What a great thing to teach, Alex. Thank you for raising that. And then seeing the effect that it has on people. People feel like it's not a popular vote. It's not the popular vote that matters. It's the Electoral College, which is this intermediary between the popular vote. And so teaching about the Electoral College, why do we have it? Where does it come from? What was the logic of it for setting it up to begin with? And then, and then trying to share information and then, seeing if people, still might see some value in voting. So great. I have some thoughts. I see lots of comments there. Keep them coming. I wanted to put some ideas for what I thought were some additional ways to teach around this, including the background, which I think is just so rich. You know, how and when, for example, did Texas start with voter ID requirements? You know, that I think that would be just such an interesting research project. You know, where did that come from? Has it always been true? When did they start rolling that out? Why did they start rolling it out? Who does it mostly affect? You know, who does it benefit? Who does it hurt? You know, just trying to look at that. That would just be a fascinating research topic. Going deeper into the history of voting rights in the US in general, because voting rights are constantly being contested. You know, we see this all over the country. You know, do ex-felon, former felons have the right to vote? You know, and if they do, how do they get the right to vote? Well, we got rid of poll taxes, but now we have this other barrier to voting. Why is that? You hear a lot about voter fraud and voter suppression. You know, what do those things mean and how can I understand them better? And then how do the battles get carried out? You know, the legislature might propose something, the governor might propose something, then they might get brought to court because some group decides that it's illegal or unconstitutional, and then a court has to decide, you know, what should happen. And so things get decided, then they get struck down, then they go to higher and higher courts, and then they get reinstituted, and then they get struck down. I mean, it's so fascinating to see how these battles play out in different states and on the national stage. So getting your students researching those things or thinking about those things, you know, for one thing, it adds to their knowledge, it adds to their research abilities, it adds to their understanding of how government works. We really do have this thing called checks and balances. I mean, it's not perfect, but it really does happen that decisions get carried out and then get checked and balanced by other branches of government. Lainey says we lose almost 1 million votes when felons think their voting rights are not restored. Yes. So just even educating people about that, you know, is really important. And, you know, many of us have people in our families where it really matters. Like we could say to somebody in our family, you actually do have the right to vote. Here's what you need to do, and I'll help you get there. There's a lot of organizations out there that kind of try to protect against voter suppression and voter fraud. And I just wanted to share a couple of those with you. If you go and try to vote and you're not allowed to for some reason, you can call this organization, dial 866-OUR-VOTE. And, you know, I have various languages that you can call and you can try to get help that way. There's also a lot of civic organizations that are nonpartisan that are trying to ensure that people are able to vote. So your students could look into those. Texas, as you all probably might know, has a history of low voter turnout. This is an interesting chart that you can kind of study with your students. You know, the yellow is the total over 18 population. The green is the number of those that are citizens who can vote. And you have a lot of people registered, actually, but then the actual number of people who vote, it's pretty low. Does anybody know why it spikes like that every couple of years? Oh, put the phone numbers back up. Oh, if Krista can do that. Yeah, the spikes, actually, I realize I'm a little low on time, so the spikes are presidential versus off presidential elections. So there's much more turnout on the presidential elections and a lot less on the midterm elections. But yeah, Texas has a little ways to go. But there's some good news, which is that early voting really improved voter turnout. So these are some statistics from Harris County, which I think is Houston, right? I think that's where Houston is located. And they had a huge improvement in their voter turnout due to early elections. You all will be getting a copy of this PowerPoint. If you request it, you can get the PowerPoint. If you don't request it, you can get a Word doc version of the information in the PowerPoint through the PD portal. So if you kind of like the way these slides are set up and you'd rather get the PowerPoint so that you can actually just adapt it and turn it into your own teaching tool, please do request that from Krista and she'll send you the PowerPoint. All right, let's talk about the Voting Ambassador Packet. So this is something that I developed based on articles written for the Change Agent. Some of them are by students, so that has a little added motivator, I think, when your own students are reading articles by students. It's a project-based learning opportunity that teaches basic skills, leadership development. It's aligned with the college and career readiness standards. It teaches about the elections. It includes, information about how the pandemic is affecting the elections, and it gives students something to do. That's what we mean by project-based learning opportunity. So they don't just receive the information, they receive the information, process it, and turn it back around in the form of being a voting ambassador, going around talking to people and supporting them to vote, to register and vote. You don't have to be a citizen to be a voting ambassador. You might not be able to vote yourself, but you could get 5 people voting who wouldn't have otherwise voted, which would be an amazing accomplishment. So a voting ambassador is not necessarily any kind of expert, but they have a basic understanding of how to register to vote, of how to learn about the candidates and the issues, of how to vote and then stay engaged afterwards, and what may or may not be different about holding an election during the pandemic, because there's a lot of buzz about this, voting during a pandemic. So a voting ambassador should have some grasp of what's different about it and what can you do to protect yourself. I'm going to now share the packet with you. I have it here on my screen as a PDF, and I'm just going to page through it so you can see it. It's readily available to you from both that Vera website and the Change Agents website under our lesson packet tab. And so this is what it looks like. It's got a cover page with a table of contents, so you can, and it's pretty long. I think it's about 13 pages. The first page in the packet is just instructions from me about how to use it and what college and career readiness standards are addressed, things like that. And then the first article is this wonderful piece by the former director of adult ed in New Hampshire. His name is Art Ellison. He's now a state congressperson, but he wrote this piece about how important it is to vote. And it's just a short, great, passionate piece that I think is good to share with students. So the first few articles are about, kind of some, little bit of passion and commitment, nonpartisan commitment. We're not trying to tell people who to vote or how to vote, or who to vote for or how to vote, but just that we're sharing this idea that we really care about your participation. We think everyone's participation really matters. And so that's what Art Ellison talks about. And this woman, Sheila Mailman, she's from Maine. She's a Native American woman from Maine. And she talks about how Native Americans in Maine didn't even get the right to vote until 1954. It's pretty shocking. But so she talks about how voting is her obligation to the past, the present, and the future. And how her ancestors, she feels responsible to her ancestors and to future generations. And so that's why she votes. And she talks about the way she got into it was her adult ed class got involved in thinking about voting. And that's what got her into, thinking about voting and teaching other people about voting. So that's kind of exciting that students in your class could see how another student in another class, got motivated that way. If you're not a citizen, here's a piece by somebody talking about what you can do. And he's an adult learner, not a citizen, who says, there's a lot of things I can do. And then there's the little purple box has more information. I'm not going to get into details. There's something that I wrote just to kind of break down the steps about, voting. And then we have a great piece by Megan Morris about, voting in times of uncertainty. We're hearing a lot about, is there even going to be an election? Or what if the election's canceled or postponed? Or what if people consider that it was fraudulent somehow? What will happen? And so she kind of addresses these in this 2-page article. Lots of great content. And then, just some forms to help students fill out if they want to become a voting ambassador. They can kind of use this form as a guide to list out their steps that they need to take to get there. And then there's also finally an opportunity to reflect on your experience and an invitation to keep a log of your work. And this is all part of, for you as a teacher and for your students, they could turn in their log as an assessment for you, or they could turn in their plan. And you could use that to assess their understanding, right? And then then giving them the opportunity to reflect, as I believe Ivy was saying she does with her census ambassador. She says she has them come in every week and they check in on how it's going. So you create this really dynamic class with a lot of horizontality, students talking to each other. What did you do? What happened? What question did you get? what did you say? Oh my God, this is what happened to me. Somebody hung up on me, you know, whatever happens, you know, they're learning how to not just store information, but flexibly incorporate it into responses to real people who they're talking to. And they're doing this because they believe it matters. So if you wanted to bring this into your classroom, you could be just really giving students a chance to do something real in the community, improve their skills, gain knowledge about the elections and things like that, and have a chance to reflect on it, which I think is really educational. You know, when you get to think about how you talked about something and what it was like and how you could improve, that's a great academic skill, a great job skill, you know, being able to get feedback and revise and then get more feedback and then revise again. So yeah, Ivy saying so empowering. And Dinah or Dina is saying yes to the PowerPoint. Oh, Krista. So this could fall on you a lot. People might be requesting the PowerPoint. And if you, which I think would be great, because I hope you could use these slides and that would just be easy for you to just grab these slides. And Lainey says, yeah, anyone can tweet. Yes, indeed. You could have your voting ambassadors tweeting about this, which would be great. Check the time. We're doing okay. I have another thing that I want to share though, which is that we're doing something brand new. The Change Agent is doing something brand new because of the pandemic and because everybody is teaching remotely now. I didn't want you to just have access to the PDF of the lesson packet, because honestly, the vision for the PDF is that you're in an in-person classroom and you make copies of this packet and you literally just hand them out to your students, and then everybody has the same packet in front of them, and you read the articles together and you do the work. But that's not so possible anymore. So what we've done is something that I think is really creative and fun, and I hope useful to all of you. And that is, we have translated the packet into Google Slides. So I'm hoping everybody can see my Google slide show now. And it's very, very long. I think it goes on for about 117 slides. But what I want to say about this is that you can pretty much do whatever you want with it. So you see my little note at the bottom. It says you have permission to adapt these slides for classroom use, including remove or add images, change the font, remove or add activities, and break up into several slideshows. But you do not have permission to change the words. Okay, so the thing that we feel rigid about here is don't change the text of what people have written. You know, this is somebody's writing, so that should stay as it is. But if as a teacher, you feel like the slides would work better in a slightly different way, you can adapt them. And this set of Google Slides is available to you. What I suggest you do, it's view only. So what I suggest you do is make a copy of it and then do whatever you want with it. Okay, and then it's ready for you to bring into your Zoom classroom. I don't know if you're using Zoom, but whatever you're using, you don't have to start over again from scratch and cut and paste from a PDF into a slideshow. And Ebony Van Dross here in my office has been working with me on this. She's done such a great job. She had a great vision for it. So you can see the article by Art, you know, it starts out with a title page and then it's got a before you read activity. And then she added images. She got little chunks of text and added images to go with each chunk. And it's just really beautiful work. I so appreciate her for doing this, because I think it's going to be just a really fun thing to bring into the classroom. And you could do this as however you want to do it. Read aloud, take turns reading out loud, reading silently, you know, whatever you think would work best. And so you can see, you know, she's been really creative figuring it out. But if there's something you don't like about the image and you want to take it out, you can do that. It's really up to you. So, and then the other thing is here from the table of contents, note that these are sort of linked, you know, so if you want to get quickly to this piece that's pretty far away, it's on slide 43, you can just click on it and you get down to that. Okay, this is not completely finished yet. So as I scroll down, you'll see that, you know, some of the pieces don't have images yet. So we haven't quite finished it. So you're going to notice us in here finishing this this set of Google Slides, but it's finished enough for you to grab it and go. Okay, Ebony, you rock. Yes, she does. I'm going to tell her you said that. Carrie says, wow. Ivy says, my student, thank you. Claire says, awesome. Great, great. Thank you. I love hearing that positive feedback. If anybody has concerns or questions, I'd love to hear those too. I just, I just want to know if anybody, for example, is thinking to themselves something that's going to get in the way for you, like a reason why, this all sounds great. She makes it sound easy and accessible and doable, but I'm not doing it because this or that, or just what's an obstacle that you might confront as you try to think about it. Kem says, how do we access the Google Slideshow? Well, let me tell you two options. One is Krista is putting the link in the chat. The other is I made a tiny URL for it. So see, I'm back on my PowerPoint now. And do you see the tiny URL? tinyurl.com/votingambassador. It's there. It's there. And Krista has put it in the chat. Okay, so really I want to encourage if you feel like there's obstacles, because I know there might be, some reasons why people feel like this might be hard. Alex says, can one add images? Yes, absolutely. It's like I said, that original permission note, I'm standing by that. You can do whatever you want so long as you don't change the text of the articles, because those articles are written, they have a byline, it's somebody wrote that. And so we want their words to stay intact. But you can change images, you could assign your students to find images and, put them in. You can do whatever you want. You can just merge all the text onto one slide so that you don't have to go through so many slides. You just read an article out loud. You can do it however feels best to you. So I hope that all makes sense. We are keeping, right now, honestly, you all are the first people to have access to this Google Slideshow. It's going to be on our lesson packet website on the Change Agent, and it's also ultimately going to be on the Vera website, but it's not there yet because it's not quite finished. But I wanted to share it with you all now because I was doing this webinar now, and I want you to have it, so, and I really do believe that it's finished enough for you to use it. There's just some missing images and things like that, but all the content is there. So Maxine is saying the suggestion could use a little plain language review, meaning the articles that I'm sharing. Yeah, that's a good point. You'll have to, what I always say about that is the articles for the Change Agent are written at different levels. I think I have the levels in the PDF. They're everything from level 4 to level 8, I think. So if you are coming across a piece that is too hard for your students, there's just too much complexity, one suggestion I make is that you pick out a paragraph or a couple sentences from a couple different paragraphs and teach that way. But yeah, I hear your point. The level of complexity might be too hard for everybody. So Claire says she's been using the 2008 democracy issue and it's been great. Students are engaged and interested. Yeah, thank you for letting me know about that. And if you go to the 2008 democracy issue on our website, you'll see that we keep updating things. So for example, there's a history of voting rights activity that we keep updating. There's a number of things that we keep updating there, but many of the pieces published in that issue are just still totally relevant. Like there's a whole explanation of the Electoral College in there that hasn't changed. And that came up in this webinar, about the Electoral College. And there's other things in that are not really time sensitive. They just teach about the process. So you can go and grab that. I'm really glad you raised that, Claire, thanks. Okay, so when you teach civics, I think it's really important to be transparent about why you're teaching it. So many of us might feel strongly about this for different reasons, and we might really believe in that voting really matters, that it makes a difference. We might feel strongly about certain candidates. We might really dislike some and really like others. We probably, as teachers, we need to check our partisanship. It's not really our place in the classroom to tell people who to vote for or how to vote or anything like that. But it's certainly wonderful, I think, to be passionate about engagement and about participation and about why democracy matters to you. So I would say don't park your feelings here. You can bring them in. And if you're transparent about it, just you're letting students know this is something I really care about. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, but I'm just going to tell you I really think that your participation matters, and it's going to show in my teaching. But also, you need to be really transparent that you're teaching basic skills here. You're not just kind of on a soapbox about civics, although civics has its own inherent value, which you can be clear about that too. But you're teaching this because it's a great way into basic skills. And your students might be in class because they want to gain knowledge and they want to learn English better. They want to improve their reading and writing and the speaking and listening. And so you can tell them, for example, if you engage in this voting ambassador project, your basic skills are going to improve. Your speaking and listening are going to improve. You're going to have so many chances to practice that. You're going to have to read some hard documents. Your digital literacy is going to improve. You can just be really clear that this is about basic skills here. And also, noting that they're going to be engaged in something that's highly relevant in their lives and that could impact their lives directly. I think that really contributes to student persistence and to just a feeling of engagement. This isn't some far off, abstract activity that has nothing to do with my daily life. It's really connected. So, okay, so we have lots of stuff that we covered. It's 12:57 your time. And I want to just mention that there's going to be another webinar on elections, and this one's going to be on October 13th. It's going to be different than this one. So this one we covered a lot of basics about voting in Texas, basics about voting in general. This is going to be slightly different. We're going to be looking at some of the issues that have come up around the pandemic and around things like voter suppression and voter fraud. And I mentioned, all the avenues you can explore around branches of government and how government works and how things get contested and decided, and how as an individual in this society you can evaluate claims, for example, about, say a politician is saying one thing about the election and then another politician is saying a different thing about it. Well, which one is right? How do I know? And how can I evaluate their claims? So we're going to look more deeply into some really interesting issues that the pandemic has, that were already true, but the pandemic has exposed even further. So that is what we're doing on October 13th. Heads up about that. I'd love to have all of you back again. I promise not to repeat myself on this webinar. It's going to be completely different. And I hope you all can come. And if you do come, I hope you'll be able to tell me something about what it's been like, having your voting ambassadors be trained and going out there and doing stuff. That's one thing I want to give you a heads up about. Another is that the Change Agent has a new call for articles coming out soon. We're going to focus on mental health and emotional well-being. It's just, again, speaking of what the pandemic has exposed, the stress from living under current conditions, with unemployment being what it is, with the pandemic being what it is. People are really struggling. People are trying to surface, strategies for coping. So I would love to get some writers from Texas. Excuse me, I just lost my voice. While I'm coughing, maybe, oh yeah, you already put the link in there. If you click on that link now, you're going to be disappointed to find the last call for articles. So the current call for articles is not quite there yet. I'm a little bit behind. It will be up shortly. So check back in about a week and you'll find the current call for articles, and it'll be about mental health. And I would love to get more Texas writers. Okay, I did get a few from last time. So that was great. Bravo teachers for bringing the call for articles into your classroom. It works as a really great writing prompt. Students can write about something that matters to them. They're writing for an authentic audience. If their piece gets accepted, they get a $50 gift card. It's kind of cool. So keep that idea in mind. This is not related to the elections, but it's a great change agent opportunity for you all. So that is all my slides, and we're pretty much at time. If there's any quick questions that you want to throw into the chat, or if you want to email me, I think my email address was on the very first slide, but I'll put it in here. I would love to hear from you, especially if you start doing the voting ambassador packet. Well, Well, thank you, T. Call. I'm sorry, I forgot to give more of a shout out to you all, but I got rushed there at the end. I realized I was going a little over, but thank you so much for this opportunity and for bringing all these great people together. And I'll sign off too, unless you have anything else for me. And
I don't think so. Thank you, Cynthia. It was a really
Okay.
good presentation.
Very good.